Good morning, everyone. I again welcome you in the virtual classroom of business environment. We are discussing unit number second, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. You know that in 1991, Indian government has adopted LPG policy as a measure to take loan from IMF. In this in that policy, three components were there. One is liberalization, second one is privatization, and third one is globalization. In last lecture, we have discussed about liberalization, and now we are moving towards the discussion of privatization. What do you mean by privatization? Privatization simply means when public sector units are sold to the private sector, then it is known as privatization. Privatization was introduced during the 80s by Rajiv Gandhi. The government of P.V. Narasimha Rao gave actual speed by introducing the new industrial policy. See, it was our PM Rajiv Gandhi who thought in 1980s that India should be given the injection of privatization to improve the productivity of Indian economy. But privatization is such a big concept cannot be adopted all of a sudden. We need to prepare our economy for that. So from 1980s, government was preparing Indian economy to adopt privatization. But finally, in 1991, government has introduced privatization in Indian economy. At that time, our PM was P.V. Narasimha Rao, and the finance minister who has framed the policy was Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now let us see in detail what a privatization means. It is a process under which government of country transfers the productive activity from public sector to private sector. See what a privatization means. You know that before 1991 we have give too much importance to the public sector, and almost in all the commercial activities it was the public sector which was handling. Private sector was given only negligible sector. But what a privatization means all the commercial activities in which the public sector was operating should be transferred to the private sector units. In narrow sense, privatization means induction of private ownership in publicly owned enterprise. Here, two definitions are given, one in the narrow definition and second is a broader definition. According to narrow definition, what privatization means? Induction of private ownership in publicly owned enterprise means the ownership of public sector unit should be transferred to the private sector. That is known as privatization. According to broader definition, it implies, besides private ownership, the induction of private management and control in public sector unit. See, according to broad definition, it has included two more aspects to the narrow definition, that is private management and private control. According to narrow definition, only private ownership were there in privatization, but according to broader definition, private management and private control also forms a part of privatization. What do you mean by private management? When the management of public sector unit is transferred to the private sector with or without transferring ownership. I am repeating, with or without transferring ownership. When only management is transferred to the private sector, it can also be termed as privatization. Sometimes only control is transferred to the private sector, management and ownership remains in the hands of public sector. That can also be termed as privatization. Now, let us see the methods of privatization. There are basically three methods of privatization. First one is ownership measure, second one is organizational measure, and third one is operational measure. So let us see in detail. What do you mean by ownership measure? When the ownership of public sector is transferred to the private sector, then it is known as ownership measure. Means the shares and the stocks of public unit will be sold in open market to the private people, then it is known as ownership measure of privatization. Second is organizational measure. Organizational measure simply means ownership is not transferred, shares are not sold to the private public, only management is transferred from public sector unit to the private sector unit, then it is known as organizational measure. Third one is operational measure. In operational measure, the aim is to improve the efficiency of public sector unit. For operational measure, financial grant and the management autonomy is given to the public sector so that they can improve their efficiency. What do you mean by financial grant? Financial grant simply means if the public sector unit is in need of capital, they will not ask to the government, rather they will raise from the open market on their own conveniency. That is a financial grant, that is a financial autonomy. So these are the different measures which is used under the operational measure just to improve the efficiency of public sector. I am repeating, there are three types of privatization, three methods of privatization. That is ownership measure, in which the shares and stocks are sold to the private sector. Second one is organizational measure, in which the management is transferred to the private sector. And third one is operational measure, in which the financial and management autonomy is given to the public sector. In our syllabus, we have to discuss the arguments in favor and against privatization. Arguments in favor privatization, let us see in detail. The first one is dismal performance of PSEs. Dismal simply means inefficient performance and PSE means public sector enterprise. First argument in favor of privatization, it says that due to poor and inefficient performance of public sector, we should welcome private sectors in our economy. Now let us see what are the reasons for the poor performance of public sector. The first one is PSEs in India are over-controlled and over-regulated, causing inefficiency to grow upwards. See what happens in the public sector enterprise. There is a protocol for performing each and every task. Government employees are need to perform their tasks according to the process laid down in the protocol. They are not required to show their creativity. They are not having any decision making power. So whatever was laid down in the protocol, simply like a machine, they need to follow it. Means there is too many rules and regulations which a public sector has to follow. When there are too many rules and regulations, it feels like a regulation. They are over regulated. If anyone is over controlled and over regulated, it loses their creativity, it loses their freedom to operate, and in that environment definitely they are not interested in performing their job, which results into inefficiency. Then secondly, it is written that accountability of public sector enterprise is minimal and no one is held responsible for the ineffective functioning of this enterprise. See, what do you mean by accountability? Accountability, in other words, we can say responsibility, and in other words, we can say that answerability. Answerability simply means if you make any mistake, if you do any fault, then you are held responsible. You need to give answer why there is a mistake, why there is a fault. That is known as accountability. Accountability, in other words, we term it as responsibility. You know that authority and responsibility go hand in hand. If there is authority, then and then there is a responsibility. If there is no authority, then there is no responsibility. In last point, we have discussed that government employees generally don't have any decision making authority. So you are not giving any authority, you are not delegating any authority, then in which context you are expecting answerability from the employees of public sector enterprise? What happened that whenever the decision has to be taken, at bottom level will ask to the middle level will ask to the top level, and the same channel will reversely follow to give order. Means top level management will say to middle level, and middle level management will say to the bottom level. Then after any decision will be taken. It means bottom level employees are having no freedom. In that situation, will bottom level employee be ready to take up the responsibility of wrong decision? No, not at all. Because he has not taken decision, why he will take responsibility? So what happens in the public sector enterprise, that you are not giving authority, so they will not be ready to take up responsibilities. Even if the mistakes are made at bottom level, they will not take the responsibilities. If there is a time to take a responsibility, they will start playing blame game. What is a blame game? Blame game simply means they will blame on other. I am not responsible for this mistake, other person is responsible for this mistake. If you go to other person, the same thing will be repeated. I am not responsible person, this mistake is done by other person. This is known as a blame game. Means you cannot choose any person, you cannot hold anyone that he has made a fault, because everyone is interrelated, and rather fault mistake is done by everyone collectively. Then political interference also has a telling effect on the performance of public sector enterprise. Political interference in India. You know that in India, public sector enterprise is characterized in three different categories. One is government company, second is corporation, and third one is departmental organization. Whatever the form of public sector enterprise is there, they are in direct connection with political parties. Not political parties, but they are in direct connection with government. And who are the government? Government is the person who is given vote from the public from one political party. So even after being a part of government, they will not behave as a government, they will behave as a representative of a particular political party. In that situation, how their behavior will be? They will use the public sector enterprise as a pawn to win the election and to be again in the government. So there is a lot of political interference in the working of public sector enterprise. Now and then government changes, the mentality of people will change, and accordingly they will change the system of public sector enterprise. And you know that if now and then the system of working will change, then definitely it will result into inefficiency. Then next one, most PSEs operate with manager having less or no expertise on the affairs of the concern. See, who are the employees of public sector enterprise? Generally, they are recruited from the government exams, public exams, known as GPSs and UPSC. See, what is the criteria of GPSC and UPSC? The question paper is full of the knowledge of different criteria. A person who is having the knowledge of almost every criteria will pass the exam, and he will be recruited as an employee of public sector enterprise. See, to have a knowledge of different criteria, but to work in a real life situation and to perform any commercial activity, these two things are quite different. A person may be knowledgeable but may not have a skill to do a business activity. He may be a totally failure to handle his responsibility allotted in a public sector enterprise. What happens with the manager? They know how to pass the exam, but they may not know how to do a business activity, how to run a commercial activity. Now, in that situation, the public sector enterprise will totally fail. Then, decision making again is a lengthy process. In fact, managerial inefficiency is one of the greatest bans of public sector enterprise. Decision making, I have discussed in the first point when we were discussing the over controlled and over regulated. In public sector enterprise, government employees are not given any decision making authority. If there is a situation to take up any decision, they need to follow a communication channel from bottom level they will ask to middle level. Middle level will ask to the top level management, and top level management will take up decision. Now it is a time to communicate decision. Top level management will say to middle level, and middle level will say to the bottom level. So there is a lengthy channel of communication from bottom to top and again from top to bottom. If you follow the chain, then it is too much time consuming, and due to that reason inefficiency will be there. Now the second for arguments in favor of privatization, that is lack of political interference, means lack of political interference in private sector enterprise. Let us see in detail. It is argued governments make poor economic managers. They are motivated by political pressures rather than sound economic and business sense. See, public sector enterprise are handled by political parties, rather we should say the minister of government. Generally, they don't have any sense to run the business activities, to handle any government companies or public sector enterprise. So they will be supported by the government employees who are expected to have a knowledge about a particular activity or a particular public sector enterprise. Now the boss will be minister and the knowledgeable person will work as a worker. Now only those workers will stay longer in a public sector enterprise if they are favored by a minister. And when they will be favored by minister, if they will say yes in their every opinion, if they will never oppose the decision taken by minister. So even if they will oppose, then what will happen? They will be either transferred or sometimes they have to lose their job. So for having a job security, they will say yes in the every opinion of minister, which results into non-profit making decision of public sector enterprise. And because of saying yes to the every opinion, they are becoming non-economical manager. The government may be reluctant to get rid of the workers because of the negative publicity involved in job losses. Therefore, state-owned enterprise often employ too many workers, increasing inefficiencies. So what happened in the government enterprise? There is a overstaffing, always overstaffing. What do you mean by overstaffing? Overstaffing simply means the people required, people recruited are always more than required. If there is a requirement of only 2 people, the public enterprise will recruit 4 people. So 2 are the excess one. These 2 are not only excess, you need to feel the burden of their salary, which will increase the cost of public sector enterprise. Already public sector enterprise are earning lesser amount of profit, and in that if the cost will increase, the lesser amount of profit will again be lesser, or sometimes it will be negative. So negative profit will be known as a loss. So why public sector enterprise are running into losses? Because of overstaffing. But the same situation will not be there in a private sector enterprise. If there is a requirement of only 2 people, then only 2 people will be recruited. Another situation, if we discuss, say for example, it was a time when 4 people was needed. So government has recruited 4 people, but it is not like that only 4 will be needed for a lifetime period. It may happen that there will be a need of 6 or 8 people. Then government will recruit 6 or 8 people. Simultaneously, if we reverse the situation, if 4 people, instead of need of 4 people, there is a need of only 2 people, government will never retrench the people. Why they will not retrench? Because if they will retrench, it will spread negative publicity in the society. Second time they cannot win the election and cannot be a part of government. But such pressure, such mentality is not there in the private sector enterprise. From 4, if there is a need of 8 people, they will recruit 8 people. from 4. If there is a need of 2 people, they will retrench 2 people. So there will be always the sufficient amount of workers working in a private sector enterprise. So there is never overstaffing and never over salary burden on a private sector enterprise, which results into higher profitability of private sector enterprise. Now, the third argument in favor of privatization is accountability of private sector raises efficiency. This too we have discussed in the first point, but from the viewpoint of public sector, and now we will discuss from the viewpoint of private sector. Privatization will usher means privatization will show in an improvement in efficiency, and as improved performance is concerned with profit-oriented decision-making strategy. Accountability is strictly ensured in a private sector enterprise, and some people are held responsible for any failure. So what happens in the private sector enterprise, the bottom level or whether it is a top level, everyone is having a freedom to take decision regarding their own work. So whenever you are having freedom, you are having an opportunity to show your creativity, to show your skill, to show your talent. At the same time, when you are having freedom, you are also having a responsibility, which is exactly the opposite case of public sector enterprise. In public sector enterprise, they are not delegating authority, so there is no responsibility in government employees, whereas in private sector enterprise, they are delegating authority. So authority and responsibility go hands in hands. When you are having authority, you are also having responsibility. You are also having the responsibility to give answer, that is a answerability. Means if you are doing any mistake, if you are in a fault, you will be held responsible for the fault and for the mistake. Now it is you who need to give answer, who need to justify your mistake, and if you cannot justify your mistake, then definitely you will be fired from your job. That is the final outcome which may come in a private sector enterprise. But firing employees from their job will never happen in a public sector enterprise. So they are always having a job security, and that job security takes public government employees in a comfort zone, and they become too much relaxed that even if they are doing mistake, they are not worried, they are not cared about the mistake. So whereas if we talk about private sector enterprise, they are always worried about the job losing. So they will be always concerned about making a mistake. They will be aware about how not to make a mistake. So there is always an accountability which increases the efficiency of private sector enterprise. Accountability and responsibility will definitely turn up the efficiency and greater output of private sector. Definitely, delegating authority will motivate the employees. They will feel that they are important person in the organization. So it will motivate the employee to work hard and to improve their performance. And on the other hand, responsibility will make them aware not to make a mistake. So when this turn up together, authority and responsibility, it will increase the performance, and simultaneously it will stop employee to reduce their performance, and ultimately the performance will be increased only. Now let us see the fourth argument in favor of privatization, that is development of social and economic infrastructures by government. See, what they mean to say that if government will not handle the public sector enterprise, then funds in the public sector enterprise will be released and can be invested for the development of social and economical infrastructure. Let us see in detail. Government resources for keeping up PSEs may be utilized for the purpose of social sector development, as this sector is starved of financial resources. See, What do you mean by infrastructural facility? If we take a few examples, then electricity is there, education is there, building roads and dams and bridges. These are the few examples of infrastructure. If we see the characteristics of this infrastructure areas, then it requires a huge investment, huge initial investment. Simultaneously, there is a slow return from the infrastructural activities. Take up the example of roads only. The amount required for building a roads will run into crores of rupees. But how you collect the fund in return? From the toll tax only, which will be a very small amount in context of your investment. So return is very slow, and that too not initial. You will get return from after a longer period of time. So these are the basic characteristics of infrastructure. First one is huge investment, and second one is slow return. Due to these characteristics, it is unaffordable area of private sector. Generally, private sector is not having a huge fund to invest, and secondly, they cannot wait for a longer period to get a return. So these are the areas where private sector will not like to enter. So government should take up the responsibility to develop infrastructure in the economy. You know that it is the infrastructure only. If it is sound, then the growth will be too good. And if your infrastructure is quite inferior, then you will be considered as underdeveloped countries. The industrial development can be based only on the infrastructural facility of a country, and it is a responsibility and the population expect from the government to develop infrastructure in our economy. But when government can develop, if it is having a fund, right or not, and when they can have fun, if it is not unnecessarily blocked up into the public sector unit. So in before 1991, because public sector unit was flourished too much because of government's mentality, after 1991 we have started selling public sector. So when we are selling the public sector, we are getting our fund released. Government is getting its fund released from the public sector. Now they are having fund on hand, which can be invested for the development of infrastructural facilities. Modern government should spend more on this sector as well as economic infrastructure, as these are the two essential pillars of growth. What is economic infrastructure and what is the social infrastructure? Economic infrastructure simply means on the basis of which the economic activity can be boosted up. And what is social infrastructure? Over which the society's life standard can be improved. You can take education as a social infrastructure, whereas to build to produce electricity can be considered as an economic infrastructure, because the major consumption of electricity will be done in the industry for running a machinery. So this economic infrastructure and a social infrastructure are two pillars of growth over which any country can develop. Now, the fifth argument in favor of privatization is LPG against anti-competitive behavior. Means they wanna say that because of LPG, competition is increased in a market, and due to competition, the quality of good is also improved. Let us see in detail. Indian private industrialists performed in a sheltered market and remained insulated from any kind of external competition. This made Indian private sector an inefficient one. Before 1991, there is a licensing policy. If you want to start any business, then you need to take license from the government. After issuing license, you can start your business, otherwise not. The process was so lengthy that most of the people of India would not go to take a license, and they will start doing a job. Due to this situation, only few players were there in the market. So there was no domestic competition, we can say like this. On the other hand, India was not accepting any foreign multinational to operate in an Indian market. So there was no competition from the global market. It means the Indian industrialists were quite in a comfort zone, having no competition at all. Means whatever they want to sell, they can. Whatever quality product they want to sell, they can. At whatever price they want to sell, they can. So what will be the situation? A poor quality product will be sold at a high price or resulting into a higher profit. Due to this situation, so many decades was passed. But when government has opened up the economy, our industrialists were not able to export the product because of poor quality. Poor quality product will not be accepted in a foreign market, and our export was always at a bottom level. What is written here secondly, goods produced by this sector were far below international standards just because Indian industrialists were operated in a sheltered market. The quality of product was quite inferior. If we would like to sell in a global market, no one will be ready to purchase. Who will be ready to pay high price for our inferior quality product? No one, right or not? So what happened that our export was always at a lower level. Privatization will promote private sector culture by introducing competition so that Indian industrialists can compete with their foreign counterparts and hence generate greater output and improved efficiency. All this trigger a chain of favorable movement in many direct and indirect direction. See what happened due to privatization. First of all, licensing policy was abolished in the phase of liberalization, and the public sector was sold to the private sector in privatization. Due to this two component means liberalization and privatization, the number of players in a market increased. The domestic competition itself increased. Simultaneously, they also adopted globalization. So, global competition from global level also increased, but that we will see in the part of globalization. But up till now, you just remember that the due to privatization, private players increased. Due to that increase in the number of players, competition increased. And what is the rule of competition? The low price and a high quality product will win, which was a quite reverse situation of a sheltered market where high price low quality product was sellable, but in competition best quality and low price product can be sellable only. So if you want to survive in a competition, you need to improve the quality of your product. Secondly, you need to reduce the price of your product. If these two you can successfully do, then you can survive in a market. If your quality can improve, then definitely it can be sold in a global market as well. So by that way, our export can also be increased. So these are the benefit of privatization, that due to privatization our export can also be increased. Now let us see the sixth argument in favor of privatization, that is absence of governmental interference. In private sector enterprise, there is no political interference. That also we have discussed in the first point, but from the viewpoint of public sector enterprise, and now we are discussing from the viewpoint of private sector enterprise. See, let us take up first example of public sector enterprise. I earlier also told you that public sector enterprise characterized in a three different categories as government company, departmental organization and corporation. If we take the example of departmental organization specifically, then railway is one of the public sector enterprise falling in the category of departmental organization, which is headed by the Minister of Government. Now, what happened in this government means railway organization? When election is about to come, then this minister will reduce the ticket rates of railway so that a positive publicity can be done in a market and they can win the election. So let us assume they are doing this. Once the election will be completed, what will be the counter move? They will again increase the price of the ticket. The ticket rates will be hike, increase. So which will have a nullify effect of reduced price prior to election. So how they are using public sector enterprise, they are using as a pawn in their hand to win the election. They are always using public sector enterprise to have uh, benefit whenever they are required at a cost. If it may happen that sometimes the decision taken by the minister will result into loss making for a public sector unit, but they don't care because it is not their money, it is the money of public. But what happened in a private sector enterprise, the boss will never take a wrong decision which results into loss making opportunity. He will always take a profit making decision. So there is no political interference, so there is no chances of loss making decision in private sector organization. Now, the seventh argument in favor of privatization is production of non-priority items by PSEs like reasoning. Means public sector enterprise are expected to produce only needy goods. If they are producing luxurious goods, then it is a logicless thing. Let us see in detail. Over the years, Indian PSEs have branched out in all directions, as their operations must not only consider economic objectives but also social welfare objectives. In 1950, when the first 5-year plan was launched, too much importance, too much emphasis were given to the public sector enterprise. From 1950s till 1991, we were following mixed economy, which was more of socialism and less of capitalism. The importance of private sector increased to a lot many extent. It increased to 50 times or 100 times. So due to that reason, the number of public sector enterprise increased in a Indian economy. At that time, government was thinking that the objective of public sector enterprise, generally it is considered as a social welfare objective, but their objective should also be an economic objective as well. In the name of enlarging public sector enterprise, the government has moved into the production of many unimportant consumer goods, producing food products like bread, fruit, juice, entertainment business, and so on. See, uh, from 1950 to 1991, the governments, from the mentality of government, they want to increase the importance of public sector enterprise, and due to that reason, they have increased the number of public sector enterprise. They even entered in the area which is not necessary. If we take the few example of necessary area, then defense equipment, then it is a necessity area which should government keep in their hands only. Private sector should not be allowed to produce. So that is allowable thing that government should be in a defense sector. But to produce bread and butter, there is like a logicless thing. Bread and butter can be produced by private people. If government will produce bread and butter, then government will get exhausted. They will not have fun. They will be exhausted in resources, in time, and in capacity. If government will start producing everything, then when government will take strategic decision, when government will focus on the development of economy? That is the question. So what a government should do, whatever the areas were there which can be handled by private sector should be handled by private sector. Let private sector handle them. So from that area, government can release themselves. After releasing, they can have enough resources in time and in capacity to focus on a strategic area, developmental issues. The issues may be border issues may be import-export issues, which are the areas which requires the attention of government. So if government will not produce unnecessary item, then government can give time to the necessary strategic areas. So to give time to the strategic areas, we should welcome privatization in our Indian economy so that government can make them free and can handle the strategic areas. No economic logic is forwarded for producing these items. Definitely, to produce bread and butter is not a task of government, but to produce equipments, defense equipment is a task of government. So everyone should do their task. Private will handle their task, government will handle their task. So the total economy will go in a coordination very successfully, very profitably, and the GDP of economy can be increased. This is all about the arguments in favor of privatization. In next lecture, we will see arguments against privatization. Till the time, let us keep it up to here only.